They say family is built on love, but sometimes family becomes the greatest source of pain. This is the story of my father, who once worked as a servant in his own brother's house. He was humiliated, insulted, and treated like a nobody. But years later, he rose so high that the same people who mocked him were forced to bow before him. Our story begins in the United States. My uncle had built a fortune. He owned a mansion in Chicago, luxury cars, and a business that everyone respected. He walked with pride, and in our community, people treated him like a king. My father, Rajan, on the other hand, had nothing. His small jobs barely paid the rent. When life became too difficult, my uncle offered him a place in his mansion. But it wasn't an offer of love. It was an offer of control. He said, "Stay here, but you must work for me." And that's how my father, the younger brother, became a servant in his elder brother's home. He lived in the basement. He woke up before sunrise to sweep the marble floors. He cleaned the kitchen, ironed clothes, and prepared tea for the family. My uncle never introduced him as his brother. Instead, he would say to guests, "This is Rajan. He helps us around the house." It broke my heart. I was young, but I understood. I wanted to scream, "That's your brother." But in that house, silence was survival. Every morning was the same. My father would work quietly, head down. If the food was too salty, my uncle shouted. If a plate had a stain, my cousins mocked him. Even the family dog was treated better than my father. I still remember one evening. Dinner was served. The long dining table glittered with dishes, roast chicken, curries, fresh bread. My father was serving everyone. Finally, when he tried to sit at the corner of the table, my uncle stopped him. "Servants don't eat with the family," he said coldly. "Eat later, in the kitchen." The room went silent. My father froze. He didn't argue. He stood up, bowed his head, and quietly left with his plate. That night, I saw tears in his eyes as he ate alone in the kitchen. It was the first time I had ever seen him break. But that wasn't the worst moment. The breaking point came at my cousin's birthday party. The mansion was full of guests, decorations, and music. My father worked all day, cooking, cleaning, setting tables. When the party began, he stood in the corner, exhausted but silent. One guest noticed him and asked my uncle, "Who is that man? He seems to work so hard." And my uncle replied with a cruel smile, "Oh, him, he's just a servant. Been with us for years." The crowd laughed lightly. My father's eyes dropped to the floor. My mother clenched her fists. I wanted to shout the truth, but my throat closed with fear. That night, something inside my father changed. He didn't cry. He didn't complain. He sat in the basement, staring into the darkness. The humiliation had burned too deep, and in that silence, he made a decision. He would not remain a servant forever. He would rise. He would fight. And one day, he would make his brother pay. The next part of the story is where everything begins to shift. Because revenge doesn't happen overnight. It starts slowly, quietly, like a seed planted in the dark. My father began to plan, not with anger, but with patience. Stay with me, because what comes next is the beginning of a transformation no one in that house could ever imagine. The night of my cousin's birthday party was the last straw. My father sat in the dark basement for hours, replaying the humiliation in his mind. His brother had called him a servant in front of strangers. He could accept poverty, but not this insult. But my father was not a man of loud words. He believed in patience. He believed that silence could be sharper than any sword, if used at the right time. And that night, he began to think about his future. The first step he took was simple but powerful. He started to learn. During the day, He continued working in the house, but at night, when everyone was asleep, he would light a small lamp in the basement and study. He read books about business, savings, and self-improvement. He borrowed old newspapers and studied the market. He taught himself how money worked. At first, even I did not understand. I would ask him, "Papa, why are you studying so much? You are already so tired." He would smile and say, "Because knowledge is the one thing no one can take away from us." Slowly, I began to see the change. He saved every dollar he could. He stopped buying new clothes, stopped spending on small pleasures. Every tip he got from side jobs, he kept aside. My mother supported him quietly, giving up even her little jewelry to add to his secret savings. Of course, my uncle and his family never noticed. To them, he was still just the servant in the house, someone invisible. They laughed when they saw him reading. My cousin once mocked him. "What are you going to do with books? Clean them like you clean the floors?" Everyone laughed, but my father only smiled, because deep inside, he was building something none of them could see. Then came the opportunity. One of the neighbors in Chicago was selling a small food cart. It was old, almost broken, and nobody wanted it. My father saw it and immediately thought of an idea. He went to the man and asked the price. It was far more than he had, but my father bargained with honesty. He explained he had little money, but big dreams. Something in his words touched the man's heart, and he agreed to sell it for less, letting my father pay in parts. That was the beginning. My father now had something of his own. It was just a rusty food cart, but to him, it was freedom. He started selling Indian snacks near a busy street corner. He woke up at 4 a.m., prepared samosas, pakoras, and tea with my mother, and wheeled the cart to the market. At first, business was slow. People barely noticed. My father would stand for hours waiting for customers, but he never gave up. He greeted every person with a smile. He served food with respect, not like a servant, but like a man proud of his work. Slowly, word spread. People loved the taste. Office workers, taxi drivers, students, they all began lining up at his cart. I still remember the day he came home with his first real profit. His eyes shone, and for the first time in years, I saw hope in his face. Meanwhile, in my uncle's mansion, nothing had changed. They still treated him as the house help. My uncle did not know about the cart. My father hid it carefully, working in the house during the day and running the cart early in the mornings and evenings. It was exhausting. He barely slept. But every time he looked at me, he said, "Son, remember this. Every insult we suffer today is an investment for tomorrow." And he was right. Within months, his small cart became popular. He saved more money than ever before. He began planning to expand, to buy a second cart. My mother worked alongside him, and I helped whenever I could. We were building something secretly, something powerful. But destiny always tests those who rise. And soon, my uncle discovered the truth. One evening, a family friend told him, "I saw Rajan selling food on the street. Is he working extra for you?" My uncle was shocked. To him, the idea that his servant brother was running his own business was insulting. That night, he called my father in front of everyone. "What is this nonsense I hear? You selling food on the roadside? Have you no shame? You are living in my house, eating my food, and secretly trying to act like a businessman?" The family laughed. My cousins mocked him again. My father stayed silent, his eyes calm. Finally, he said, "Yes, I have a cart, and one day it will make me free." My uncle roared with laughter. "Free? You don't dream too big, Rajan. You will always be a servant. Remember your place." But my father only smiled, because deep inside he already knew his time was coming. The very people who laughed at him now would one day eat from his hands, not as servants, but as guests. And that day was closer than anyone imagined. My uncle thought my father's words were just empty dreams. To him, Rajan was only a servant, someone who could never rise above his fate. But outside that mansion, something powerful was happening. My father's food cart was turning into a lifeline, not only for us, but for many others. Every morning, before the sun rose, he and my mother prepared trays of food. Samosas stuffed with potatoes, hot pakoras, steaming cups of masala tea. At first, the customers were few. But then, the office workers nearby discovered his food. They loved it. Taxi drivers stopped by on their breaks. Students came after class. Soon, a small line began to form every morning. My father greeted each person with warmth. He didn't just serve food, he served respect. He remembered people's names, asked about their families, and treated every customer like a guest in his home. That was his secret. People weren't just buying food. They were buying kindness. By the end of the year, his cart was the busiest on the block. He had saved enough money to buy a second cart. This time, he hired another struggling immigrant to run it. The man worked under my father's guidance, and soon the second cart was just as popular as the first. Slowly, my father's secret business grew. 2 carts became 3. 3 became 5. And each time he expanded, he made sure to hire people who needed help, workers who had been overlooked, people who were poor or new to the country. At home, nothing had changed. My uncle still treated him like a servant, but my father never argued. He still swept the floors, still prepared tea, still bowed his head when insulted. On the outside, he was the same. But inside, he was building an empire. I remember one winter night clearly. My uncle scolded him for being late to clean the living room. My father had just come back from his food cart, his hands freezing, his body tired. My uncle shouted in front of everyone, "You are worthless, Rajan. You will never be more than this. Don't waste your time pretending to be something else." My father looked at him calmly and said, "We'll see." Those 2 words shook me. They were quiet, but strong. For the first time, I saw fire in his eyes. Meanwhile, the food cart business exploded. Local newspapers began writing about it. "Authentic Indian snacks in the heart of Chicago," the headlines read. Customers praised the taste, the prices, and above all, the humble man who served them. Soon he opened a small shop. It wasn't fancy, just a little corner store with a few tables. But people flocked there. Lines stretched outside the door. And this time, my father didn't need to hide it. Everyone knew his name now. Rajan wasn't just a servant anymore. He was becoming a businessman. Of course, my uncle hated it. His pride couldn't accept that the brother he once called a servant was now earning respect. He tried to laugh it off at first, saying, "Selling snacks is nothing. Real men run big companies, not street food stalls." But deep inside, he felt the sting. Because while his construction business was slowing down, my father's food venture was only growing. Then came the turning point. A well-known investor visited the shop. He loved the food and saw the long lines of customers. He approached my father and said, "Have you ever thought of turning this into a restaurant chain?" At first, my father hesitated. It sounded too big, too risky. But the investor believed in him. He offered financial support and mentorship. My father accepted the challenge. Within 2 years, that little shop turned into 3 restaurants, then 5, then 10. Each one carried my father's name. People started recognizing him not as Rajan the servant, but as Rajan the owner, Rajan the master of flavors. And yet, in the mansion, my uncle still refused to accept the truth. He continued to treat him like nothing. But the cracks were showing. His business was losing money. His debts were piling up. And the same relatives who once bowed to him now whispered behind his back. The tables were slowly turning. One evening, my father came home late. He had just signed the lease for his 10th restaurant. My uncle, drunk with anger, shouted, Why do you waste your time on this nonsense? Do you think a servant can ever become a master? My father finally looked him in the eye and replied, "A servant who works with honesty can rise higher than a master who rules with arrogance." The room fell silent. No one dared to speak. For the first time, my uncle had no reply. And yet, the true revenge was still to come, because destiny had one more twist waiting. Stay with me, because in the next part, you'll see how my father's success not only made him the master, but forced his arrogant brother to kneel before him. The cracks in my uncle's empire grew deeper every day. His construction company, once so powerful, was drowning in debts. Projects were delayed, workers were leaving, and clients had stopped trusting him. Yet, he still sat on his high chair at home, pretending nothing was wrong. Meanwhile, my father's restaurants were thriving. Each one had long lines of customers, and the name Rajan's Kitchen began spreading across the city. People praised the authentic food, the affordable prices, and most of all, the humble man who started it all with just a street cart. But at home, my uncle continued to taunt him. One evening during dinner, my uncle smirked and said loudly, "Selling food may feed you, Rajan, but it will never make you a master. You will always remain below me." The whole table went silent. My cousins avoided looking at us. My mother squeezed my father's hand under the table. But my father? He just smiled and said nothing, because he knew the day of reckoning was near. Not long after, the storm hit. One morning, loan officers arrived at the mansion. They demanded repayment for my uncle's debts. His business was collapsing, and he had nothing left to offer. In desperation, he tried to sell off the family house, but the banks refused. The debt was too high. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in my uncle's eyes. The man who once stood tall, who humiliated my father at every step, was now a prisoner of his own pride. And then came the twist of fate. The very investor who had helped my father expand his restaurants also had connections in real estate. He approached my father with an opportunity to purchase a huge property, the very same property my uncle had once dreamed of buying for his company headquarters. My father hesitated at first. Buying it meant stepping directly into his brother's world. But destiny had spoken. With the profits from his restaurants and with the investor's backing, my father signed the deal. When the papers were finalized, my father didn't gloat. He didn't laugh. He simply brought the contract home and placed it on the table in front of my uncle. I can still remember the silence in that room. My uncle's face went pale. His trembling hands picked up the papers. And there it was. His brother, the servant, the man he mocked all his life, was now the owner of the property he could never afford. "Impossible," my uncle whispered. My father looked at him calmly and said, "The servant you once denied food has become the master who feeds thousands." Tears filled my mother's eyes. I felt a chill run down my spine. And my uncle? For the first time, he lowered his head in shame. But the story didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, my uncle's company collapsed completely. He had no choice but to sell his remaining assets. His so-called friends disappeared. The relatives who once praised him now turned their backs. And one evening, something happened that I never thought I'd see. My uncle came to my father's restaurant. He wasn't wearing his expensive suits anymore. He looked older, broken, defeated. He stood at the counter while customers watched in shock. And with a trembling voice, he said, "Brother, can you give me a job?" The entire room froze. The mighty man who once made my father a servant was now asking to serve under him. My father didn't gloat. He didn't humiliate him. Instead, he placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "You are still my brother. I will give you work, not as a servant, but as family, because true revenge is showing mercy when the world expects cruelty." And just like that, the tables had turned forever. My father went from servant to master, not by fighting, not by shouting, but by building, by creating, and by rising above the cruelty he once endured. And that was his greatest revenge. Life has a strange way of teaching lessons. When I look back at those years, I see more than just revenge. I see transformation. My father didn't rise because he hated his brother. He rose because he loved his dignity, his family, and his dream of being free from humiliation. Many people believe revenge is about destroying the other person. But my father taught me that true revenge is building yourself so high, so strong, that those who insulted you are forced to respect you, even if they don't want to. I'll never forget the last time we sat together at the dinner table. The same table where my uncle once told my father that servants don't eat with the family. This time, it was different. My father sat at the head of the table, surrounded by his workers, partners, and even his brother, who now worked under him. The food was served. Everyone waited for my father to take the first bite, and he looked at me and said, "Son, never forget, humiliation can be fuel, but don't let it burn you. Let it light your path." That moment will stay with me forever. Over the years, my father expanded his restaurants across different states, from Chicago to New York. From Texas to California, his name became a brand. Rajan's Kitchen was no longer just a place to eat. It was a story of resilience. And my uncle? He lived a quiet life after that. He worked honestly in one of my father's businesses. The arrogance was gone. The pride was gone. What remained was humility. Perhaps that was the greatest lesson for him, too. You know, people often ask me, what was your father's biggest victory? Was it owning the property? Was it building the restaurants? Was it making his brother work for him? And my answer is always this: his biggest victory was forgiveness. Because anyone can rise, anyone can make money, but very few can look at the person who once crushed them and say, "I forgive you." That is strength. That is mastery. So, dear listeners, what do we learn from this story? We learn that no pain is wasted. No insult is meaningless. Every humiliation, every rejection, every tear, it all becomes fuel if you choose to rise. My father could have remained bitter, angry, broken. Instead, he built an empire. And here's the truth: you can too. Maybe your family doubts you. Maybe your friends laugh at your dreams. Maybe people see you as nothing more than a servant in their story. But remember, your story isn't over. You can write your own ending. As my father once told me, you don't need to fight them. You just need to outgrow them. So if this story touched your heart, if it made you feel even a spark of inspiration, then I ask you, not just as a storyteller, but as a son who lived this journey, please support us. Hit the like button. Share this story with someone who feels small right now. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because every week we bring you stories that remind you of one truth. No matter where you start, you can always rise. And maybe, just maybe, the revenge you seek will become the respect you earn. This was the story of my father, a man who entered his brother's house as a servant, but left the world as a master. The choice, my friends, is yours.